There's this really great fragment in Epicurus where he talks about the idea of traversing the smallest perceptible part, where basically if you have a point and you're able to move from that point to another point, then you can always break down that surface into smaller and smaller points. The idea being that no matter how small the particle that you arrive at, there's always going to be a smaller and smaller particle. And this is it's an analogy for an overall epistemological framework. Epicurus was one of the first materialists, and that is the epistemological framework that materialism works in. It's the same framework that Marxism works in. Marx wrote his dissertation on the atomism of Democritus and Epicurus. So basically the idea here is that no matter how small of a point that you get, no matter how fine your understanding of whatever object of scientific inquiry you're looking at, there's always going to be further and further refinements that are possible. So that pertains to the realm of pure science, where you're doing pure particle physics, for example. But obviously pure science bleeds into practical science, which further relates to technological development. So the idea is that pure science is always going to be questing after its object. It's never going to be able to actually discover the ultimate identity of its object of inquiry, and that eternal pursuit is going to yield the possibility of eternal new developments in practical science. So basically, there is the possibility of always developing new technologies. There's the possibility of always developing new ways to apply science, and pure science, the pure scientific pursuit is never going to actually reveal any kind of absolute truth. So in that sense, the pursuit of truth in a scientific framework is ultimately useless. Because it reveals nothing about human nature. It reveals nothing about what it means to be a human being. So why would you waste your time on such an activity? I mean, we do other things that are not meant to be, have ends in themselves. Like working out, for example, is a good example of that. It's something that you do for the process rather than for some end goal. So obviously, practicing science as in the same kind of mindset as a pleasurable activity in itself is fine and dandy. If that's what floats your boat, then go ahead and do it. But the idea of pursuing scientific truth to uncover some real nature of the universe, which is really what Enlightenment philosophy is all about. That is the solution to nihilism since Kant, since the first critique. It's ultimately futile and really ultimately just a waste of time. There are many technologies that have been developed from the pursuit of pure science that have been beneficial to society, and the pursuit of practical science in order to solve certain problems that society is faced with. For example, the development of new vaccines to deal with viruses that are raging across the globe and killing scores of people. That is well and good, and it's great, and we should do that for sure. But that is that is not something that one should be doing on an individual basis. It is something that society itself should be determining where to put its collective resources, rather than allowing people to, or endorsing even people pursuing science and technological development on their own. the relationship between pure science and applied science and the development of new technologies thereby is really kind of analogous to the dynamic between the base and the superstructure, and in general how the market works within capitalism. Because essentially you like the development of science and the pursuit of like scientific knowledge is this kind of unregulated like free-for-all where people are pursuing their own interests as individuals without actually like without any real social consciousness, which is, and like whether or not, we can say that like maybe the pursuit of like scientific knowledge doesn't seem like the worst thing in the world, but is my belief that it is a huge waste of time for a lot of people. I think that, within a future communist utopia, like obviously there will be need for science in order to deal with the kinds of obstacles that history throws up in our path. But again, those sorts of the solutions to those problems will be arrived at through a collective determination of what is in society's best interest. But it won't. But in terms of like individuals choosing to be scientists and to like pursue the scientific question and like scientific knowledge or whatever, that is not going to be done in a communist utopia for any kind of like pure reason, for its own sake. It's going to be done for pleasure, for aesthetic, for like design purposes or spiritual purposes. Although, I mean, I don't really think that science really pertains to spirituality. I think that's kind of like what I'm arguing against here. But yeah, so there's this like famous anecdote of how Mao, like in the middle of a famine, decided that the solution would be to kill all the sparrows, which brought on a plague of locusts, which ravaged what few crops they had left and like made the famine even worse. Without getting into whether or not that's true or not, and like whatever, that's not my point here. The point is that I'm not advocating that we throw out the scientific knowledge that we have accumulated already, nor that we abandon science as a method or as like a truth process, as a means to like solve whatever problems might be thrown in our path. Rather, I'm saying that for anyone who may feel themselves inclined to that kind of path, who feels that they might like uncover something true about the world, that there is the possibility of actually obtaining truth in an absolute sense through the scientific pursuit, I think that is futile and you're wasting your time, and you should really be concerning yourself with more what we would consider spiritual or existential practices. But also, I mean, historical materialism is a science, and I am a big advocate for that. But the difference here is that, again, like just how I said that, like we should absolutely be investigating like vaccines in order to deal with this virus that is, currently a big thing that we need to deal with as a collective globe, as a global population. Historical materialism, the science of revolution, is also something that we need to be dealing with, because we are currently mired in this terrible situation that we call capitalism. And historical materialism, the obtaining the object of that particular scientific pursuit, it will be the end of all necessity. I mean, to what extent, like the scientific discoveries that we praise, like medicine and engineering or whatever, are really just band-aids applied to ailments brought on by modern society. I mean, that is like a bigger question, but certainly, like, if we are able to actually achieve a revolution and undo capitalism and, like, install communism, then these sorts of questions will become somewhat moot. Like, we will be able to direct our scientific resources where they are needed. And so I think that, for anyone who feels an affinity with the scientific, like, ethos, with the philosophy of science, I would just advise you to consider on what basis you are interested in pursuing that. If it's in the aspiration to obtain some kind of true knowledge about things, that's useless, and you're going to be wasting your time. If it's to like solve like immediate problems that society is faced with today in this year of our Lord 2020, then that's all well and good, but I think you'd be perhaps better off, working for a revolution, although perhaps that's not where your skills lie. But yeah, I think that's all I have to say. Really, is that in a communist utopia, I think that our interests as a human species will lie somewhere else, somewhere more aesthetic, somewhere more spiritual, and science ultimately is something of a waste of time. And this is a view that is not new. It's not original to me. It's certainly not. It's really foundational to materialist epistemology. But I'll see you next time.